value of that particular contract is low, it allows to put more technical weightages because it will be less price sensitive because of the value. And so, more emphasis could be put onto the quality side. So then you are at, the top left box somewhere. But then if there is low complexity or low procurement risk in a particular package, but it could still have a high value, okay, then in that case, it will be very price sensitive. So you could afford to put lower technical weightage, okay, because it's less complex or does not include any significant procurement risk, but the price is high. So, we need to take that into consideration. What is in the middle is you have a scenario where you have high procurement risk, high complexity, but at the same time, you have a high value. Okay? And that's where it becomes a bit difficult because we want to enhance the quality. So somebody will say, it's high procurement risk, it's very important contract, okay? And we need to make sure we get it right. But if it's very high value, we need to be mindful that it is going to be price sensitive as well, okay? What we don't want is that, we aim for very high quality, which comes at a very high cost because it is price sensitive and it blows out the employer's budget, okay? So quality at reasonable price, okay? So that's where it fits into the box in the middle. These are just few examples. Like, you may have a road upgrade contract, water treatment plant or tunnel, signaling systems, e-buses. I just wanted, why I put this slide was, just to look at all the considerations when you are designing criteria or weightages, right? You need to take into account what is the modality of the contract, whether it's design, build, whether it's design and build. When I say design, build, bid, it means construct only contract. Sorry, I should have been clear in my terminology. The first one for the road upgrade is design, bid, build. So design is done by the employer, then it's bidded out for construction only contract. So it's typical procurement of works, FIDIC Red Book based contract, okay? The water treatment plant is design and build where the contractor will be responsible for doing the design and building. Then you could have a tunnel, again design build. So you need to take into account what the contract modality is. What are the different site conditions that will help you assess understanding the complexity or the risks involved during implementation. How the market looks like, whether it is very competitive market, whether there are limited contractors, whether it's monopoly or duopoly market, and that should also inform you because then, how do you put the technical financial weightage can have a significant outcome on, influence on the outcome of the bid. And the other complexities should be taken into consideration, right? And also, what are the employer's wish or expectation? Do they want to fast track this contract? Whether they want to ensure that any equipments or goods which are used are of high quality, or whether the focus is on saving the cost and balancing that with all the complexities involved in the implementation. So, how do you develop the criteria if you are designing the merit point criteria? These are the examples which should generally apply for any kind of infrastructure package, from site organizational, key personnel, design and construction methodology. So if it's design and build, there will be a design methodology. If it's construct only, it will be construction methodology, health and safety, risk, management, quality, works, materials, So when we say about works management, it could be secondary procurement. So principal contractor has to procure pipes, valves, pumps, etc. Right? So it could be the planning and the logistics around that. Testing, commissioning, handover. Yesterday, if you attended our session on sustainable procurement, there was a pilot case which one of my colleagues presented on carbon management, which currently we are piloting. Maybe in future there will be requirements on the carbon management incorporated in the bidding document. So depending on the scope of the contract, and other consideration, this can be also an important criteria. And of course, the community and the social and the local participation we mentioned. Simple example for a transport project. So, earlier I talked about the criteria, heading criteria, and then the sub criteria. So if you see on your left, these can be heading criteria, right? Whatever applies for that particular contract, right? Site organization, method statements, mobilization, construction schedule, environmental. Mind you, these are already there in our bidding documents without MPC also. And as I mentioned earlier, this is anyway required through the technical proposal, but it's more of compliance rather than what's being offered, and not assessed through the scoring system where somebody may propose a better proposal, okay? Not the minimum proposal, and that's where the MPC comes. And then what you see on the right is basically the number of sub-criterias developed within those heading criterias, right? So method statement, okay, method statements for what? Okay, if there is a pile construction, if there is supply, delivery of any structural steel involved, prefabricated, precast elements during assembly if that's involved, mobilization schedule, environmental. So you develop the sub-criteria. Sometimes you may not have any sub-criteria. It may only be a heading criteria, and that's fine. Okay, so I mentioned about the narrative, earlier. So now you have the heading criteria, sub-criteria developed, right? Now, if employer is just writing board pile construction, okay, but it can be written in different ways, right? But how is employer going to evaluate your methodology around that? So some information has to be given out in the bidding document. So that's where the importance of this comes in, okay? The next important point is developing the weightages around those criteria and sub-criteria, okay? So you go through this sequence. So you have the technical financial score done, then you get into the development of criteria, sub-criteria, develop the narratives around those criteria, and then you go into putting in the weightages for these criteria. Okay, so weightages should be developed for criteria and sub-criteria, if any sub-criteria are there. Most weight on the criteria will be with the highest importance, and lowest weight for criteria or categories with least importance. It's logical, right? It's obvious. You will see now that how it varies and what are the different ways to actually develop the weightages and assign weightages. Okay, so this is just to show you what I mean by weightages as an example, right? So if you see in this table, you have a criteria, then you have sub-criterias within each criteria, then you have a category weighting, which is basically a weightage given at the criteria level. And then in the last column, you see the breakdown at the sub-criteria level. This is another example from Bangladesh water sector project. So you can see again the criteria, sub-criteria. As I mentioned earlier, it's not mandatory to have sub-criteria. Like in this one, the first one, it was just left at the criteria level. Yeah. This is another example from Philippines railway project. Okay. So how do you put the weightages for the criteria? The most common method, and from my perspective, the most problematic method is personal preference. The engineer on the job, okay, who has been involved in design, or the employer who say, okay, I know what I'm procuring through this particular contract, okay, and then I think this criteria is most important. I think the survey is most important. I think the methodology for river crossing is the most important, right? Which may be true, okay? But then, are they following any method? Now, if there is an engineer, structural engineer, he might be very passionate and very worried about, laying a pipe and crossing the river or the railway crossing. And he basically thinks this is the most important criteria, and he will go and assign 50% criteria. So he may be right in saying this is the most important criteria, but the question is whether that particular criteria requires 50% weightage. That's where some of the different methods comes in, right? So first was more about personal preference, which is what it happens most of the time. And it's random, it's not accurate, it's super fast. It doesn't take time to develop the criteria. Half an hour, I know this, apply the numbers, done. Without realizing, it is actually introducing a lot of biases and anomalies through this method. The other methods, different methods, are using calculations, okay? So there is a rating scale or fixed weighted method. There is rank sum weight method, equal ratio method, pairwise comparison, and analytic hierarchy process. I'm not going to go into details of all this method because I can talk for entire day, but I'll just quickly touch upon this, right? So the rating scale and the fixed weightage method is again a simple, very fast, they just develop a scale and then split it. Then rank sum weight method is basically, okay, so in the personal preference we said, I think this is the most important criteria. This is the most important criteria. So then the method which can be used is, okay, rank. So if you have total of 5 criteria, okay, you start ranking based on the priority, which is the most important. Don't apply the weightage yet, but you rank 1 to 5, which is the most important, right? And then you can apply a simple arithmetic formula, okay, based on the ranking out of the total number of criteria, and it will tell you what should be the weightage. So it's more of mathematically arrived rather than, no, I think it should be 50%. Right? So it's still somewhere linked with the personal preference because the ranking, the ranking is still includes the human intervention a lot, right? Then there is an equal ratio method. It's too confusing. I'm going to give 20% to all. All are equal weighted, okay? Again, it's not right. Okay, because not every single criteria requires the equal level of weightage or treatment, right? One will be important compared to other. So that brings us to the last two, which is the most logical methods, okay, and mitigates a lot of disadvantages of the other methods, which is the pairwise comparison. So it's very complex, but it's basically, every single criteria and sub-criteria, you take a pair and you compare the two, and you keep doing that process through each criteria and sub-criteria. So the positive of that is, it does not give any space for human intervention or set in biases when the employer is actually putting the weightages, right? It goes through a very methodical method and it spills out the weightages. Analytical hierarchy process, it's basically an extension of the pairwise comparison. So you do the pairwise comparison, but then you basically start adding weightages in the comparison. Sorry, it may not make sense too much what I'm saying, but it is complex. The purpose of this was to really give out that there are different calculations which can be applied, different methods which can be applied to arrive at the weightages or at criteria and sub-criteria level, okay? You may want to go and explore those further. Some of you may already have that experience, okay? So, but it's important, this is where the real success of MPC will come in, if this is all designed properly. The development of the criteria, the sub-criteria, and finally the weightages at each criteria and sub-criteria level. If this is not designed correctly, it will bring in a lot of subjectivity, and the whole purpose of application of MPC and enhancing quality may get defeated. So this is very important that it's designed properly. Okay, I've just put out some bullet points why calculation method is required. I think I spoke about it. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, even if you are using a calculation, okay, to develop the weightages and assign weightages, you may still, going through that process without realizing might have include some biases and anomalies which you may not see it. So it's very important that we do the sensitivity analysis of the criteria and the weightages which has been assigned to just check how the results will come out, before the final design is agreed, okay, in the bidding document. This is also important. Remember on the other slide I said, what is employer's wish for that particular contract? Is it focusing on enhancing quality, equipment and goods? Is it saving costs? Is it actually minimizing the implementation risk, or schedule is most important, right? So when you do the sensitivity analysis, we have to ensure that it's meeting what is required or expected for that particular contract, the weightages which has been assigned, okay? Now that brings us to scoring and evaluation. How I'm doing on time? Okay, we still have time, okay. Okay, I'm not going to go through the flow chart. We talked about it before. You will have the slides, you can go through it in detail later. Right, so this is very important. So what we talked about is the criteria, sub-criteria, and the narrative around criteria and sub-criteria, okay? But what it means really to be a good proposal versus average proposal or not meeting the requirement, that is also defined in the bidding document, so that bidders knows that how the scores will be assigned. So for example, if you look at this table, acceptable submission will be given scores in the range of 60 to 80. And what acceptable submission means? It satisfies the requirements. What requirements? Remember the narrative. The narrative around each criteria or sub-criteria level. That is the requirement for the technical proposal, not necessarily the requirement under the contract as in employer's requirement. However, both should be aligned, okay? Because the obligation under the contract will be delivered during implementation. But during evaluation, what is required as part of the technical proposal is defined in that narrative, and that is the sort of definition around what it means to be an acceptable submission, okay? And there is a range from 60 to 80% of score. And then obviously on the upper side, it's good submission, excellent submission, and then the submissions with some reservation, some serious reservations, and unacceptable submissions, right? Now, you may say that, it's a big range, 60 to 80 in terms of acceptable submission, okay? And this is where the professional judgment comes in, especially for when evaluating from the technical perspective, right? So there is a little bit of subjectivity, but it's important to have that subjectivity, because the professional judgment and the experience also is important to be taken into account. Otherwise, we are just doing the pure mechanical evaluation, tick, 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 every single criteria, sub criteria is marked at 1%, and there is no space. So it's completely mechanical process, right? But there is a benefit to have some degree of professional judgment to be part of the evaluation, but not to an extent where it will start bringing in a lot of bias into the evaluation, right? And that's why this range has been kept. Okay, so how the evaluation is done? So it's required by ADB that evaluation is done by the evaluation committee, okay, of minimum 3 members. In many of our borrowers' countries, that may not be the practice or requirement within their own administration if it's government funded. But for ADB projects, it is mandatory to have evaluation committee, minimum of 3 members. Assess each bid solely based on the evaluation criteria. No opinions. What was the criteria? What has been submitted? What has been defined in the bidding document? Okay. Score should be objective and not determined through comparison among bids, right? So it's important that within the evaluation committee, the evaluators are going to assess independently and assign scores. And when they do that, it's important that the technical proposal are scored on its own merit and not in relation to what other bidders have wrote. Consistency in applying an interpretation when they actually put the score. It's important that they apply all the criteria required consistently throughout the bidding process, through all the bidders. And the clarification. I think my colleague touched upon the clarification part. So if you are a consultant and if you are helping the executive agency during the bid evaluation report, okay, so this is an example of very poor bid evaluation report, okay. So this was the criteria and sub-criteria defined in the bidding document. And if you see, this is the only paragraph which was stated in the bid evaluation report for bidder number 1 across all the criteria to support their scores. This tells us nothing at ADB, that how the evaluation was conducted, whether, how the scores were applied across each criteria and sub-criteria, right? So the narrative in the bid evaluation report across each criteria describing, linking with this table. So the bidder number 1, criteria number 1, they submitted this proposal, whether if there were deficiencies in their proposal, what were their deficiencies? What was good about that particular criteria, okay? That should be clearly narrated in the bid evaluation report to justify what scores have been given to each bidder against each criteria and sub-criteria. Again, a lot of times so this is just an example of the technical scores, but a lot of time we see that, even this is not clearly, presented in the bid evaluation report. What is most important also is the evaluator's guide. It's very important that, there is a evaluator's guide developed. Okay, so whoever is part of the evaluation committee, they have some guidance, so that each evaluator, when they are independently giving the scores, okay, they have a same ground rules or house rules set how they are going to do the evaluation. Okay, this is also we will capture in our guidance on merit point criteria, as I mentioned at the start, that the importance of preparing the evaluator's guide and how to go about it, what should be part of evaluator's guide. Yeah, it should also describe the moderation process and how things will be documented. So we keep getting requests many times that once all the individual evaluators have applied the scores, generally executing agencies wants to just do the average, and that is not recommended, because, as I said, there is a professional judgment. There is a space, a professional judgment to a point where it does not, bring in biases. So when we talk about moderation process, it's based on the consensus. So then it is expected that the evaluators come together, and as a committee, they actually discuss and reach a consensus score based on their individual scores, and also taking into account, so why somebody gave this score on this particular criteria, which may be different to other evaluator. They need to discuss what they saw in the proposal, what the other evaluator did not see it, discuss, agree, and reach a consensus, rather than going a mathematical average. Because if they are going through the mathematical average, it does not provide opportunity among evaluators to discuss, what they saw good and what the other evaluator did not see good in it. It may look something like this. This is to ensure the consistency and fairness during the evaluation. Okay. So next is the combined technical and financial score. So this is the most common formula which is being used. You will see that this is what is currently also in our bidding documents, which includes MPC. So, there is a technical and price. If you have been consultant before and applied on ADB's consulting services, you are familiar with this. So it's basically a weighted average sum of technical score and financial score. And weightages are applied based on the technical financial ratio which is determined. Yeah. So what we are doing now is we are looking at different models also. Okay. For now, this is our standard approach, and it has been our standard approach for many years. In consultancy also, and but at the moment, there is a working group which is working on it, and we are looking at different formulas to arrive at the combined financial and technical score. Okay. I hear this a lot, and there is a strong debate that it's so easy to put a very good technical proposal, okay, because you can just hire a very good consultant. If you are a contractor, you can just hire a very good consultant, technical person, write a gold-plated technical proposal, meet all the criteria, have great marks, and then what? Does this ensure quality? Maybe not, and this happens, okay? So it brings us to now focus on how are we going to ensure that the actual quality is going to be achieved if it is promised through the technical proposal, right? And how do we enforce it through the contract? So at the moment, we have not finalized what how it will be enforced, but these are the different options. Okay. um, so there is a specification put out, okay, in the employer's requirement at the bidding stage. Now, if depending on the nature and scope of the bidding document, it can vary. Okay. Now, if there was an opportunity given to the market in the procurement of goods to offer a better quality or higher specification, because it may have a longer life, for example, or lower O&M cost, if you may have a different technology with higher specification, right? And if you are the rank one bidder, then those specifications will get translated into the contract. Okay. Because that's what you have promised through your technical proposal, and that's why you are rank one. There can be signed declarations, to be finalized during the contract negotiation. There could be discussions and clarifications that you are promising this in your technical proposal, and how is employer going to know that you will actually deliver this as quality. And there could be negotiation and clarification process where the minutes can be part of the contract, and there will be consequences if those not implemented. Incorporation of the bidder's proposal to the contract, that's another option. There could be KPIs, key performance indicators, which could be developed based on what has been proposed in the technical proposal, and some financial consequences attached to it in the contract. So if you promised high quality and if you fail to meet those KPIs, there can be a financial consequences, because you got higher quality or higher scores, and maybe your price was also higher. Okay. There could be a additional performance security requirements if you fail to deliver those quality. So these are the options. We haven't finalized how we are going to enforce what has been promised in the technical proposal. Okay, debriefing. This is, I think, my colleague already touched upon debriefing and complaints. But if it is a lowest price method, the debriefing may not be very important, because most of the time you will know that, okay, I lost the bid because my price was not the lowest, right? But when we apply merit point criteria, the role of debriefing becomes very important, because if you did not achieve the scores you were expecting, okay, you may want to know through the debriefing process. So there is a process, but I'm just highlighting the importance of debriefing will be much higher when we apply merit point criteria for you to get the feedback. And then obviously there is a complaint procedure. I'll not go through in the detail. The first point of contact, as my colleague mentioned, is to raise a complaint with the executing agency or the employer, procuring entity who called for the tender. If you don't get the response, or if you are not satisfied with the response, you can always reach out to ADB through ADB's complaint handling system. Okay, so that is me. Happy to answer any questions, and before you go, please don't miss out to provide us the feedback. It will help us in understanding how we should be designing our future sessions. Thank you so much. And this presentation will be available on Development Asia website. I think all the presentations will be available on the Development Asia. So if you just go on the Google and type Development Asia, it's an ADB website. It will take you there, and you will be able to find. You may not find it now, but in few days' time after the event, the team will be uploading all the materials of the fair. Okay, so you can find, yeah.
May I ask, will you guys upload it in the event app?
No, I think it will be on Development Asia web page. No, I think all of the materials of the BOF will be available on Development Asia. Any questions? So that means either I delivered very well or very poorly, that there are no questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, my name is Vicky Kim of like a Korean Export Promotion Association. Like during your presentation, you mentioned like for consulting service, it's usually 8:20 or 9:10 like a technical price ratio. And for the like work or goods, you said it's very flexible. But my question is like from your experience, what was the most common like ratio between technical and price? And also, is there like minimum ratio for the technical for work?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. There are so many variables to this, because if you recall, our first slide was like, so many sectors, right? Now I come from water sector, and I would say water sector is the most difficult sector or the complex sector because the implementation for water infrastructure basically are usually through narrow roads in the city if you are laying pipe or rehabilitating old sewers, and it involves multidisciplinary from engineering perspective. It's not just civil works, it involves mechanical, electrical, so many things. So but if you are building a road, now that can bring its own challenges, whether it's a road going along the countryside, and if there is an existing ROW, there is maybe no major challenge. You are not dealing with traffic. But if you are building a bridge or a flyover within the city, you will have all those challenges, right? So each contract can be very unique based on the complexity involved during implementation. Also taking into account the contract modality, right? So if employer has done the design, okay, and they are going to give the drawings good for construction, then basically the expectation is contractor will come and construct to those drawings, right? The liability remains with the employer for the design. But if it's design build, and if the bidding document is structured for inviting the technical solutions from the market, that's where you can offer innovation, right? So those kind of bids can be high technical score, because then you are incentivizing the market to come up with innovative, high quality technical solutions, right? But if it's traditional kind of construct only contract, and with some complexities involved during implementation, you would want to maybe provide lower technical score, right? And then again, as I mentioned in one of my slides, there is a very delicate balance between price and technical, right? So if you have a high risk, highly complex package with high value, and if it's very price sensitive, so yes, quality is important, but then it has to be balanced, because it's high value contract. Every single extra point on technical is going to be very price sensitive, right? So then in that case, you might want to give very high technical weightage because it's very complex, but then if it's high value, it may actually blow out employer's budget, right? So you need to find that balance based on the risk, complexity versus what is the value, and what you want to actually see in terms of quality in that particular package. There is no one answer, I'm sorry. But you will see a lot of guidance around it. As I mentioned, by end of this year, we are going to publish the guidance around it. So a lot of guidance will be there. Different scenarios and examples will be presented in the guidance, which will probably help you navigate through better understanding.
question about the applicability of this to consulting contracts. I see it like traditional design, bid, build, or TA activities. It seems like it's mostly going to be applied to goods and works and construction activities. Am I correct on that point? Or is
On the
there a-
consulting side, we already have merit point criteria, what we call QCPS, quality cost based selection. So that's already there for years. For all the consulting contracts, we have always been using QCPS method. Usually it's 90-10, and specifically if the scope involves developing master plan, feasibility studies, or early part of the project development, because as you all know, any decision made at the early stage of the process will have a higher degree of influence on the downstream implementation of the project, right? So we give a lot more weightage on the technical side, on the consulting. If it's construction, supervision, and management, maybe we agree for 80-20. Generally, we don't go below 80-20 for consulting packages. Sure.
It's just a follow-up to her question. So that means you are not bringing any fundamental change in the consultants' procurement
No.
criteria.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, again, just following up on that, the 80, 20, and 90, 10. So if there's a borrower asking for services, construction services, supervision services, at the EOI stage, if you decide to go with a 90-10, and then does ADB allow for that to be changed to like an 80-20 during the RFP stage, or I just wanted to get your feedback on that. Once it's fixed at one percentage breakdown, should it be then followed all the way, or can you change that?
So yes, I don't see any reason why it cannot be changed. However, we may require very strong justification to agree to change, because at the shortlisting stage, at the EOI stage, any shortlisting is just based on the experience, right? It's only after RFP it will start affecting how you put your proposal together. So, I mean, there is a scope for change, but it will require very strong justification from the employer to convince ADB team that we want to, let's say, downgrade from 90-10 to 80-20. We may agree if there is a good reason, so long as all the bidders are well informed during the bidding process, ideally before the issuance of the RFP stage. But it can happen after EOI stage. Why not? Because EOI shortlisting is purely based on your past experience.
But, sorry to intervene, the criteria for evaluation is known only at the RFP stage. It's not known at the...
Exactly. Yeah. So the downside of downgrading it is basically, if you are a shortlisted bidder and you see that, okay, I wanted to really participate in this bid if it was 90-10, but now it's 80-20, I'm not going to bid. So that is the risk. And we will take that into account into the decision-making process. That, what if some of the shortlisted bidders may not want to bid because it's downgraded from 90-10 to 80-20.
Yeah, that is very important, because a lot of consultants that value their technical expertise, they would only go for at the EOI stage, they would only submit an EOI because they think a 90-10 is there.
Yeah.
And then if they only find out at the RFP stage, right when the RFP is issued, that it's now changed to 80-20, it puts them in a very difficult situation.
So what I'm describing is that there is a possibility. The rule does not say that we cannot. Okay? But how many times, if you ask me how many times it has happened, I'll probably say in my journey with ADB in last 8 years, maybe less than 1%. maybe. And I'm just saying maybe because some of my colleagues might have faced that. I have not yet faced that. So, like I said, I just want to be clear that rule does not stop us from that. However, we will basically require very strong and compelling reason from the executing agency to do that.
But the employer needs to have ADB's approval.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'll not stop you more from lunch. So thank you very much for being patient and attention. Thank you.